This is 9.5a of algebra. So we're going to work with completing the square. Okay, so this is another way to find our solutions or our roots or our zeros, okay, when factoring wouldn't work. Okay, so if you picture having x squared plus 8x, okay, we can rearrange that like this. And you see this open space? What we're going to do is we're going to figure out how much do we need to add, this yellow part, to make it into a square. Okay, and I think it'll make a little bit more sense if I explain it in an actual problem. So when we have, in this case, we're supposed to add 16, okay? And we get x squared plus 8x plus 16. And what's so special about this is if we factor it, factors into x plus 4 times x plus 4, which, to write it neater, is x plus 4 squared. So when we're completing the square, we are looking for a number to add to both sides so that we can write it like this. Okay? And that makes it a lot easier to solve. So we're going to start out by figuring out what numbers do we need to add to make it a perfect square. So we've got x squared plus 20x plus c. And they want to know what value of c do we need to make this a perfect square. Okay, so what we need to do is you're going to take the number that's on the x, you're going to divide it by 2, and we're going to square it. Okay, so this is 10 squared, which is 100. So our c needs to be 100. We need to add 100 to make this into a perfect square trinomial. Okay, it also so happens that this number right here is what goes into your factoring. So this would be x plus 10 times x plus 10, which, to write it nicer, we write x plus 10 squared. And I'm going to actually work this out in a table, right? Remember how we used the tables before? Just so you can see why exactly we're doing this stuff up here, okay? So I put the x and the 10 here, x and 10. We get x squared. This gives us 10x, 10x, and 100, right? So this is x squared plus 10x plus 10x plus 100. Another way that I can write this is 2 times 10x. Okay, and so that's why I'm dividing by 2 up here. Okay, because whatever my end result is, in this case 20x, if I want to figure out what these little pieces are, I just need to take the 20x and divide it by 2. Okay? And the reason we square it is because down here is where we squared or did 10 times 10, right? 10 times 10 is just 10 squared. So you don't need to know exactly how it works as long as you can remember to do this, but it's good to know why it does work. So let's try another one. Let's do x squared plus 12x plus c. Okay, so I take the number that's on the x, 12, divided by 2, and I need to square it. 12 divided by 2 is 6, so this is 6 squared, and 6 squared is 36. So our c is 36. We need to add 36 to make it a perfect square trinomial. If I would factor this, remember that's where this number comes in. X plus 6 times x plus 6, which is the same thing as x plus 6 squared. Okay, now we're going to make it a little bit more tricky, okay, but stick with me. So this is going to be a pretty long process, but you can do it, okay? So here's our problem right here. You might look at that and say, hey, let's just factor it. Here's the reason why we can't factor it. If you look for the numbers that multiply to be 15, there aren't any that will add to be 9, okay? And that's why we use completing the square, okay? So first thing I need to do is I need to figure out, well, first I got to move the 15, sorry. So we've got x squared plus 9x plus 15 equals 0, right? Since we can't factor it, I'm not going to leave it equal to 0, okay? What I want is I want this stuff alone. Remember in the last problem, we'd have the x squared and we'd have the x, and then it just had a c? Well, obviously they're not giving us a c here. So we need to get those guys alone, okay? So we're going to subtract 15 from both sides. And we get x squared plus 9x equals negative 15. Now you're just going to ignore that negative 15 for a minute, okay? And you're going to look at this stuff, and we're going to figure out how much do we need to add, okay? So just exactly what we did on the last slide. So, remember, we do 9 divided by 2 squared, which is 4.5 squared, which is 20.25. Okay, so we're going to add 20.25 to both sides. Okay, so I've got x squared plus 9x equals negative 15, and I'm going to add 20.25 to both sides. So I get x squared plus 9x plus 20.25, and over here we get 5.25. So you might think, my goodness, that just got way more complicated, but it didn't, because remember, this is what we can factor now. Okay, and that's where we get this number involved. So this turns into x plus 4.5 times x plus 4.5. Remember, the cleaner way we write that is x plus 4.5 squared. So that's what I'm going to put in there, okay? X plus 4.5 squared is equal to 5.25. So my whole goal here is to try to get that x alone. So I need to get rid of this guy. And the opposite of squaring is taking the square root. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides, which leaves me with x plus 4.5 equals about 2.3. But here's the deal. Whenever we draw a square root, we get a positive and a negative answer. Okay? And now it's hard to work with a plus and a minus in one equation. So what we do now is we make two different equations. X plus 4.5 equals a positive 2.3. And x plus 4.5 equals a negative 2.3. And now I can solve that. So I'm going to subtract 4.5 from both sides. And I get that x is equal to negative 2.2. So there's one of my solutions. And if I subtract 4.5, we get that x is equal to negative 6.8. And there are my two solutions. Okay, I realize it's quite a long process. I'd suggest watching this a couple times, probably, at least this specific problem, so that you feel confident with it. Let me write out the steps. Okay, so first thing you need to do, you need to get x squared and bx alone. So that means move the number, the c, right, the number at the end, move it to the other side. Okay, then you need to figure out how much to add. Okay, and that's your b divided by 2 squared equals some number squared. Okay, right, and that gives you some answer. Okay, then you need to add that to both sides. Add to both sides. And then you need to factor the left side. Right, usually you have it on the left side. The side that has the x's on it. And it's going to end up being x plus this number right here. Right, so x plus number squared. Then you're going to take the square root of both sides. And then you're going to set up two equations. One that's positive and one that's negative, right? Because you get two different answers from that square root. And there's your homework.